Greetings and welcome to another episode of I Survived Youth Group in the 90s. I'm your host, Scott, and of course, joining me this evening is my lovely co-host, Caleb. Caleb, what are you doing tonight? What's going on?
Getting called lovely, apparently.
For the first time.
It's not lovely. It never is. It never is.
Oh, don't sell yourself short.
Ruggedly unhandsome, maybe?
You're right. You know what? That's right. That's more accurate.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm here with my ruggedly unhandsome co-host, Caleb, and we're back again to talk about the experience growing up as youth group kids in the 90s and how that has shaped our adult lives. We'll talk to old friends about their faith journeys spanning from the 90s to today and discuss current cultural topics through the lens of somebody who grew up during that era. Caleb, we don't have a guest today. We had thought that what we would do is maybe summarize the interviews that we've had so far and kind of discuss what we've learned from them about the way people have changed between now and 25 years ago. If my memory serves me correctly, we had talked about in the intro episode how we felt that our youth group experience was rather unique in terms of kids running the church for a little bit, more kids in the church, in the youth group than there were the church, and how that kind of drove the church to do some things. So after talking with many, many people, do we still feel that way? Were we super unique in the 90s?
I still think we were. I'm holding to that for two reasons.
Mm-hmm.
One is the aspect that you mentioned, just with how many kids were coming to our youth group whose parents didn't come. I think that is genuinely unique. And I think about a couple of our first interviews. For one, you're one of those kids.
Sure.
Your parents were not coming to the church. And I think about Jackie, Bill, and Mike. Those three specifically, for me, that really stands out. Those are three of the most involved people in the youth group. You're definitely one of the most involved people in the youth group. And your parents are not there. I mean, they're not showing up. They're dropping you off before you can drive, or you're off at youth group events, and your parents are not involved, and their parents were not. And I think that does make it really, really unique. That's one. And then the second thing is the intensity. We've heard about the intensity, the 7 a.m. on Sunday morning discipleship things, and some of those things, I think those were intense, not just intense like extreme 90s stuff, but there was an intensity. You and Jackie talked about, and I think Mike too, maybe Bill, I think all three of you talked about the discipleship stuff that you were doing with people and just the push to not be hanging out with your friends. So I think some of those things really do make it a very unique experience still, even though there were more similarities to other youth groups than I think we realized.
Well, we'll get into the similarities in a minute, but
yeah.
A lot of what we remark about so far is the fact that many of the kids there, students there, did not come from the church. You can think of a few like Mike, whose parents didn't go. Well, they went to Catholic church. Again, we were kind of targeting like not only non-Christians but kids who went to other types of church. Bill's parents really weren't churchgoers, that sort of thing. A lot of us were kind of looking for something a little bit more but in certain capacities, right? So
yeah.
Mike needed that familial aspect.
Yep.
Leah, who we recently talked to, just wanted that fun aspect that
yep.
like, hey, I needed something different than my liturgical organ music upbringing kind of thing.
Right.
And I think that's we live during this transition. We live during this transition of, hey, we want to have our kids in youth group, but we also want them to enjoy it. Yeah. Because whatever it was in the 90s, we were certainly like learning that we needed to and deserved to enjoy things as 13, 14, 15-year-old instead of being forced to sit through something that was a little bit less ruckus.
Jackie talked about the idea that like her parents were going to a church, if I remember correctly, but her friends didn't go there. And so this was an opportunity to be with friends. So that also is another aspect to it, right? For some people, it was more, feels like it was almost fulfilling a family need. But for her, it was just like, well, hey, my friends are here. I really like going with my friends. I like seeing my friends regularly, and
Mm-hmm.
that was the draw for her originally.
Another thing I remember being remarked about a lot is most from the people we've talked to, almost all of them understood that the leadership, the volunteers at Five Oaks specifically, had everyone's best intentions in mind. Right?
Right.
We haven't talked to very many people who had a super negative experience. Again, we've said it many times, but if you are out there, we have as much interest as in hearing your story of those who have stayed for so long. So please don't hesitate to reach out to talk about it. But we kind of realized through those conversations and through being parents now ourselves, like those people, many of those people are giving up their weekends, they're giving up weekday nights for hours and hours on end, and random times when maybe other students need to talk to them and not talk to their parents. And everyone had the best intentions for the students in mind, which was we want you to grow, we want you to make good choices and grow up to be adults who still have a faith.
Yeah, I think that's something that has come up a lot as well. Just that adult leadership, that adult volunteer. And now we've gotten into a couple people who were actually adult volunteers even without attending the youth group, because now we've talked to a couple people who've kind of seen that sort of engagement as well. So it's been interesting to hear about that side of it as well, and kind of where they're at. You know, we've talked to a couple people who've done that. So
I'm continually impressed about how many of the people we've talked to have stayed in one way or the other.
yeah.
I mean, that was a big surprise early on. A couple of people you've heard, and hopefully if you haven't heard like Mike's interview, please go back and listen. He literally got connected in 1996 and has never left, ever. And that's a remarkable testimony to kind of the type of community the church was hoping to build.
Yep.
I don't know how common that is. Maybe that's a unique aspect. Maybe there are a lot of people who do leave their youth groups and never go back.
Yeah.
Maybe not. I don't know.
I mean, I don't know. I can't think of too many people who are still at the church they were raised at, which isn't totally accurate, because a lot of the people who've stayed. I mean, we've talked about, you know, Jackie and Mike as two examples of people who are still at that church, that they weren't raised at that church, but their youth group experience was there. And then, you know, we talked to Brant too, and Brant's there. You know, he's still at the church now. He had a little different path. He, you know, went off to college and did some other things, and you know, but to have like three people that you interview still be at that church all those years later, I do think that feels very unique. I mean, just even. Maybe you're right. Maybe it's much more common than we think, but I just can't imagine there's a whole lot of people who are still going to church with their parents. You know, that doesn't seem very likely.
Where their kids could see, you know, those kids' grandparents, or, you know, my parent, you know,
Yeah.
if that were the case.
Yeah.
You know, that's pretty, you know, that's pretty unique. There are a lot of, there's been a lot of second, third generation kids who are going back to the youth group as it is now. And, you know, look, that's you know, whatever you think of the church, it's actually a pretty cool testimony.
Yeah, I think so.
What are some other things that you can think of that either surprised you or stick out in terms of, you know, responses people had?
I mean, I have to admit that I had forgotten about the kidnapping, and I had forgotten about a couple of the gross stories. You know, Jackie specifically dropped a couple choice gross stories on us that I had clearly put out of my mind, and clearly had no recollection of. So that was surprising to me, how much of it I had just kind of forgotten those moments, or put those moments out of my mind. And, you know, once I say them, of course, it comes flooding back, and it's clear as a bell. But yeah, that was pretty shocking that somebody was able to so easily drop these. Oh, do you remember? And I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't remember, but I do now. And just to see that happen a couple times is pretty hilarious.
Yeah. Memories can be fickle. That's for sure. Yeah, I appreciate a couple of different kidnapping perspectives. One from, you know, like your sister probably got kidnapped in 1996 or something. And then Alex, who was a totally different scenario. They're like, hey, come to the back of the church, kid. Nothing's going on back there. Still weird.
Yeah,
Still a
exactly.
weird concept. On that note, what I found interesting as recently as like Tim's interview, as you had talked about many episodes ago. Like, at what point was there a youth group playbook of sorts? And Tim kind of confirmed, like, you know what? The youth group playbook's been around for a long time. Yeah. Longer than you think. I'm like, you know what? This does go back pretty far. And some of the ways to make kids embarrassed / comfortable, whatever the case is to go extreme.
One more thing that I think is pretty hilarious. It was kind of a memory that I shared. I had shared a memory early on that involved one of the people that we then interviewed. And it was really funny to hear her reaction to me telling that story. And like, then she had to explain this to her kid. And like, so that was pretty funny to me that she also kind of like, I look back at it pretty fondly as like a pretty fun memory. It was a story I told during the events one where I told a joke and it was very much directed at a group of people. And she came up and walloped me after I got off stage for telling that joke. And it was pretty hilarious to hear her kind of laughing about it and then having to explain it to her kid. And I think those sorts of things make me want to find more and more people that like have to tell these stories that then somebody else hears and laughs out loud and has to kind of explain it to somebody else. I think that's a pretty unique experience. And you've asked a couple times about like, you've asked certain people like, what do you tell your kids about your youth group experience? And so I like hearing about some of those too, like just people talking with their kids. And that moment made me laugh when we were interviewing her, and she was, laughed out loud at the story and then had to go back and do the explanation to her kid. So
what was funny is both of you were like, I was wrong. No, I was wrong. And then I was like, no, you were right. You were both right.
I was wrong. Let's be honest.
That's true. In this case, that's true. Yeah. I mean, what are some themes that you can think of that we've heard throughout the podcast then at this point or in our interviews? One thing that stands out to me is for those people who have kind of changed more drastically than not, their faith is still in Jesus, but some of their theological beliefs, tenets, and then cultural, how that affects their cultural interactions, political, familial, or otherwise. They had kind of wide stretching experiences outside of a bubble, if I can say that safely, whether it's, like Bethany traveling to Thailand, or, someone challenging someone else's understanding of a certain belief in a non-threatening way.
Yeah.
The larger or the closer that bubble gets to popping, the more people seem to have started to think, oh, maybe the way that it was taught specifically in that moment, in that era, I can have a different belief on that at this point.
So far, we've found a fair amount of comfort with the idea that I've changed. Like, I think people are kind of comfortable with that idea. And you're right. A lot of it does seem to be this, I got out into the world. We've heard a couple stories of I started working with somebody, or I was doing this with this individual. And all of a sudden I realized, oh, this person is not from the same background I am, or has very distinct beliefs from me. And it's a good experience to kind of have that engagement with those individuals. And you're right, have that bubble stretched.
Yeah, I think a few people talked about how they came out of high school youth group and in through college, and certainly as part of my story too. Maybe you could use the word confident. You could use the word zealous.
Certain is another word that's come up.
Yeah, I would use that to describe, the way that people kind of entered that next young adult stage.
Yeah.
And yet a lot of times when that confidence or that zeal gets deflated or challenged, and you can kind of look back on that time to be like, wow, I didn't know any better, but I took things kind of intensely.
Yeah.
I think it's in some of our conversations that's shown to be a healthy habit to look back and kind of analyze who you were back then.
Yeah.
But a few people have talked about, and it's been interesting to me, how confident they were.
Yeah.
In those beliefs. And then did the doubts or the questions or the challenges completely break them? No, it doesn't happen to everybody. I'm sure it happens to some, but it just, shakes things to a foundation, and then God builds it back up for them in a little bit different way.
Yeah, and we've definitely had a couple people too who there hasn't been as much of that shaking that's gone on, where they've just felt like, oh yeah, where God has me, He's continued to have me and continued to put me in that spot. So it's even been interesting to see kind of some of those contrasts of, just again, we talked about there's a whole lot of different paths that people have taken to where they're at now. And, I think still what is interesting about all of it is to this point, and I still think it would be really interesting to have somebody who can share why they view the youth group experience less fondly. And I get that would feel a little scary. I trust that there are people out there that can do it without, the phrase I keep on using is, could be critical without being malicious. I know there people are out there and we'd love to talk to them. But to this point, there's been a lot of, even with those folks who have had bigger shifts in their views, there still is this fondness of youth group. And I said it after, I think I said it on the intro to Alex's, after listening to him. And Alex, it almost felt like he was holding that youth group time. I mean, he made the comment like it was the best years, some of the best years of my life. And like there was this reverence for that time because I think it just does feel it felt so special. And I think that's pretty amazing, even with people whose views are shifting, that there still is this, yeah. There was maybe some things that weren't perfect, but there's this reverence for that time and that situation and for all of those activities and connections that they had.
And what that tells me, and it's resonated in some episodes, is, look, did Five Oaks do perfectly? No one would ever say that. But the degree to which they were able and hopefully continue to be able to produce community, particularly for students.
Yeah.
It's, the student experience is ubiquitous. Your middle school, high school years, yeah, sure, can they be great, but they can also be miserable.
Yeah.
And, it's very healthy to look back and understand how temporary those years were. They feel like your entire life. They feel like the most important parts of your life. And then you get to be, snap your fingers, 40 plus years old. And you're like, that didn't matter very much.
Yeah.
And that's such a hard perspective to gain. And so in the midst of that, giving students community where they can be themselves and they can own it a little bit and find a safe place to make friends. Yeah, of course it's going to last a long time. That the comment you just made reminds me that when Bill brought up how long he had actually lived in Minnesota and part of our group, maybe 2 years, only 2 years. Like that is, I understand that's not a long time anymore, but back then it was forever.
Yeah.
And so it really implanted those emotions, onto us. And it's hard to separate those two.
Yeah. That might have been the most surprising thing. Both Bill and Mike, I swear it was 4 years. And I guess I knew it once Bill said it, but like, yeah, it was really only 2 years, not even, that he was really involved in our youth group when me and him were there, because we graduated. And holy cow, like that's a relationship that literally has lasted to this day. I mean, again, up until we switched churches, I was seeing Bill on a real regular basis, and we were all in each other's weddings and all that stuff. And it's just real. That one was maybe the most shocking moment, when it was like, started doing that math and going, was it really that short? That is crazy. So
any other things that stand out for you? Any highlights of conversations? You talk to people who are like your sister, who are close to you, and people who are close to us friend wise. Like, is there anything else that jumps out to you?
I don't know if it jumps out at me, but it has been, there's been enough moments here to warm the heart that's made me kind of go like, okay, this has been a fair amount of work to do this. Like, to actually, we found finding people is way more harder than I think we thought. But it's been enough like heartwarming stories, and just even people that I wasn't super connected with. I think about Brant and Alex. I wasn't as connected to them at all. And because Alex didn't even join until I was long gone. But to kind of just hear some of their stories, and just, it's been fairly heartwarming. There seems to be a moment in almost every episode where I kind of get this, like, the warm fuzzies. And I think that's been, I think we expected a little bit more critique when we started this, and we just haven't found that yet. Now I think like I said, I think it's potentially out there, but it's been overwhelmingly like this positive response to a lot of things.
And I wonder if we find, because as we keep going here, we're gonna start talking to people who were in church in the 90s, just not Five Oaks. Like,
yeah,
obviously those, at some point, those people run out. And maybe the people who had a negative experience, and again, we don't look down on that negative experience whatsoever. We were lucky to have a mostly positive one.
yeah,
But if your experience was very negative, that we're very willing to talk about it. At the same time, like we told one of our guests recently, this podcast is not some amateur gotcha journalism
right,
hit take on Five Oaks Youth Group. That's not it.
yeah,
We're not looking for problems. We're just curious about the journey. Maybe those people who are out there who have had a negative experience don't want to talk about it with somebody like you and me.
yeah,
And so maybe we'll come across people who come from other youth groups, other kind of evangelical faith backgrounds, just cultural differences, living in a different part of the country, for instance. And they'll be okay talking about that negative experience with us because we have no stake in that game, right? We don't have any investment there. We don't know those people.
yeah.
And those people probably aren't listening to this wimpy little podcast we have. So, they're more willing to open up.
Yeah. How about you? Is there any other things that have shocked you or surprised you to this point?
I think was surprising to me is just simply the simplicity with which people spoke about the youth group. And what I mean by that is, I think youth group as a whole, at least ours, for a lot of people, helped make their lives a little more simple and less chaotic. It wasn't, it came alongside them during a difficult time. It provided a space for them to grow a little bit, be challenged a little bit. But it was something that really, sincerely, I think most people that we've talked to have held on to dearly.
Yeah.
There hasn't been a lot of, when I asked the question, like, is there something that you had a problem with? It wasn't like, oh, the leaders talked down to me or something. There wasn't any significant, story like that yet.
Yeah.
And hopefully that's the same for many people. And another thing also that stuck out to me actually was, we asked the question, what are you uncomfortable with? And Brant had said the process of getting kids onto leadership team where he was selected to be on it and one of his really close friends was not.
Yeah.
And my memory's pretty bad, but I'm very confident I do not remember any negative aspect to that, that choosing part of it. I was just like, sure, you got to be qualified. As if I knew what it took to do a certain job. I never thought before Brant said that for 1 second how it might have affected somebody who got rejected. I just assumed that they were like, oh, okay. They thought either no big deal or, okay, I'll just try again next year.
Yeah.
Never thought it would have been like a referendum on someone's faith journey and how hard they're trying. And again, best intentions by our leadership team. They did not mean any ill will by it. And in some regards, maybe you can make the case like, hey, that's what a job interview is like. So we're helping prepare for the real world.
Right.
But faith isn't a job necessarily. But, that one took me back. So those types of responses have been kind of more frequent than I thought. Like, whoa, I never thought about it that way because I was so pigeonholed into thinking, yeah, leadership team I always made it. So it was very affirming. And another one we talked about with Pastor Tim was, the difference just between, and we didn't talk about a lot, but introverts and extroverts, those sorts of things kind of, okay, I can see how a pastor's understanding of people and the group has changes over time.
Yeah.
And again, there's nothing wrong with that, but like that makes the group more robust, right? If you don't blanket everyone with the same expectations, that sort of stuff, that makes the group more robust and at the end of the day more welcoming.
Yeah. that whole leadership thing made me, it's funny. I was thinking about that and then even talking, cause like, I know we also had it for like going on mission trips. Like you had to
Yeah.
apply and do it. And it was kind of like this thing where I was like, but you know, they, they're taking these people's kids around the world. So yeah, knowing who they're taking, like, should they have the right to say, no, I'm not taking that kid? Because it becomes this weird balance too of like, well, there is something to be said about, they do need to know who they're taking and they do need to have this level of seriousness. But yes, I don't think I had any friends who, not that I know of, and who somebody might shock us, that tried out for something and didn't make it, or applied for leadership or a mission trip and wasn't accepted. And so it does become this weird balance, I think, of like, yeah, there is also, you do need to, with those sorts of things, maybe leadership less so, but yeah, with like going to Mexico and do a Mexican orphanage, like, yeah, you may not bring every kid because yeah, it was an interesting and unique experience that you don't necessarily want. Maybe you don't want everybody for certain reasons.
And maybe that illuminates a little bit of the special experience a youth group is, and maybe was, is it's not a sports team.
Yeah.
But if it can function that way,
Yeah.
it's more of a community, but also there can be segmentation.
Yeah.
And it sounds like, again, all the adults and paid leaders that were there did their best intention to break down those walls. Yeah. But at the same time, leading into another comment that always sticks with me now is, I didn't realize really even until we started talking with Tim and his perspective of how driven John was as our youth pastor to have us at Perkins at 7 a.m. on a Sunday.
Yeah.
And then be an early service, and then probably like leading some sort of Sunday school during second service time. And then afterwards we'd go out to lunch together as a group.
Yeah.
If I did that to my kid now, he'd be like, get out of here. No way.
Right.
And Tim was like, this is ridiculous. Let's move it to noon. And the part of me just was like, that's right. That was a good move for teenagers, So we really were in a position of like, somebody has a high bar for us and expects the most. And there's no problem with high bars by any means. And fortunately, we were in a system that supported us to try and help us get to that bar.
Yeah.
But again, maybe that's not the case for everybody.
When Tim said it, I thought about it afterwards when I was editing, and I thought, well, was it because John was driven or he wanted to watch the Vikings games? Because that's the one thing I did think about is I do remember John. He didn't go out to eat with us afterwards. We all went out.
True.
He took off. And so I do wonder if at some point it was, I want my Sunday afternoon, so I'm willing to do this early morning thing so I can be done with them and I can get away from all of them and go out. So that would be interesting to ask John, like, why was it so early on Sunday mornings? Because it was early. I do remember that. But then I wonder if there was a football rationale for the scheduling.
John will always love his Vikings.
Yeah.
I did not think of it that way.
Our church has whole events revolving around Vikings games, so it's so weird. There's so many Vikings analogies at our church today, and I'm always just like,
you're lost.
Oh, did they play? Oh, good. Go team.
Did they win? Who got hurt this time?
Yeah.
But no, I mean, it can be a little bit of both.
Yeah.
I'm a coach and I'm doing these fall workouts until tryouts, and I'm like, all right, kids, 8 a.m. on a Saturday, let's go. And all of them are very upset about it. But,
sure.
Whatever the intentions were, I think there was definitely a part of it where it's like, you know what, let's push them. There's nothing wrong with being pushed, as long as you're caring for somebody at the same time. And for the most part, I think that happened. Again, maybe my experience is different than others.
Yeah. The only other thought that I have is I have a friend that I met online who is very encouraging to me in my podcast endeavors. And he's been listening and he really, really likes the disclaimer that we do. Like, he's like, I really like that you're just kind of saying like, just talking and we're not arguing. And I hope I hope that really comes through for people. Like, two parts of it is like, just because somebody said it doesn't mean we may totally agree or disagree or anything. Like, yes, obviously we're being pretty affirming of like, we both say, yeah, or, that sort of thing. But I really hope that spirit is something that does encourage people to do that here. Like, again, we'd love to have guests who want to come on and share, but like, I've been encouraged to like think about that in my own personal life now. Like, oh, I'm trying to apply that on this podcast where I'm not going to argue with anybody. I'm not going to feel the need to fight back, even if it's a little thing, but just letting people kind of get it out and talk and just have this open dialogue. And so I have been excited about that. And he was really impressed with that so far. So this is a bit of a tooting our own horn, but I really did feel encouraged by that, because it was kind of like, okay, that is really what we're going for. This is a chance to share what's on your mind. And you've made the joke a number of times of the free therapy. It can be a little bit of that. And I think it has felt, I know for both, I'll speak for me. I know it has felt a little therapeutic at times. It's like, oh, this is kind of just fun to talk about and get out there. So I am encouraged by that. And I think we've been able to do that. I think we've been able to have, kind of a variety of guests on, and not everything I say, I'm sure you agree with, and I don't 100% agree with everything you say, but it's still, hopefully it can kind of show like, yeah, we're trying to have this conversation and trying to engage and just give people a chance to share. So I don't know. I like that idea a lot, and I'm glad we've been doing that.
There's no defense of the experience one way or the other, right? Like, we're not here to defend the good times we had, and if you didn't have them, what's wrong with you, kind of thing. Because certainly we were very cliquey at times.
Yeah.
Right? We went back and forth in a recent episode about, like, was it a good thing that John made us sit with other people and we were forced to not do that? Yeah, we hated it because all we wanted to do was hang out with our friends, what everyone wants to do.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it really did draw people in.
Yeah.
So I think that, like you say in the disclaimer, we're assuming everyone's best intentions here. We don't want to be a place where people can't share it, or we're not open to it. So it's better for you and I, even though we may disagree at some point, unless it's like something totally egregious, which we really haven't come across, is just to be like, yeah, interesting, great, tell me more about that.
Yeah. All right, so we're like 10 interviews in, about 20 episodes. You thought of this idea 3 years ago. Like, you kind of had a vision for it when it started. What are your hopes for the kind of the future as we go here, as we keep on going? We're getting into the fall. We still got kind of a stack of interviews that I'm working through, and well, not a stack, but we got some interviews that we're working through. What's your hope going forward, and has it changed at all from kind of what you originally thought of 3 years ago?
When I thought of this 3 years ago, it was like, you know what? Let's just hear stories. Everybody loves a good story, right?
Sure.
And hopefully these stories have been good for the people who listen. And hopefully it's because you're connecting with those stories in a personal way. So, look, we have found some stories to be pretty similar, whereas others have been very different. And I hope in the future we can talk to somebody who is antagonistic or not about the experience. They've just stopped going to church, not part of their life. Okay, yeah. Why? That is something we hope to talk about. And again, if you're that person and interested, we're not here to bait you into coming on a podcast where we can convince you to come back.
Yeah.
That's not the deal. So yeah, please reach out to us if you're interested in that way. But yeah, I would love to hear maybe more analytical or critical sides of it presented in good faith.
Yeah.
I would also hope that at some point we could maybe talk to some more adult leaders. Maybe we can talk to some of the pastors there. I would love to talk to John and to Henry again. I know they're busy and that sort of thing. Maybe not. Maybe they're just close to retirement. Maybe they're on the 18th hole of their career and they're like, yeah, I got time to do this. Let's go. I can get paid for this. But I would maybe I like that perspective from the leadership side that Tim gave us. And I like that perspective of people coming in from the outside like Troy and Malia gave us. So if we can figure out, how to talk to some more adult leaders, that would be great. Other than that, let's just keep the stories going. I try to do these interviews in a way where the answers in the conversation is not so specific to us that the podcast itself becomes a click. I'm trying to find some commonalities that people can identify with and then really drill down to the why. Because I know the why for me and a few people that we've talked to, the reason or the why that they've changed is very important to them. And if people need to be heard, let's hear you out. What about you? What are some things that you're kind of hoping for here in the next season, even though we probably won't be taking a break?
I'm just hoping to keep up. That's really my goal at this point. 'Cause I took a vacation and it killed me. I got so far behind on stuff.
Let's do like our church did and find unpaid interns to do the work.
I think I am the unpaid intern. I think.
Well, that's true.
So, no, I'm glad to keep on doing this. I think it's been fun to. I mean, so from a real pragmatic, I think that's the right word, technical perspective, it's been really fun to learn how to do this. That's been super enjoyable for me. I've really enjoyed it, but it's been fun. I've gotten to meet, again, I mentioned I don't think I had more than one or two conversations with Tim before we talked with him. I had never met Alex. Even Brant was, I had a lot more interaction with Brant, but he was far enough behind me where I think he was a freshman when I was a senior, or maybe even a freshman after I was a senior. So I didn't have as much interactions with him. And so that's been really, really fun to do. And it's been fun to just catch up. I mean, just to see kind of people. So I'm excited. I don't have any big lofty goals outside of just keep on trying to help us get this out and get it produced. And I still think it has an opportunity to be a blessing to people. And again, I think it has an opportunity to be a blessing to people who are still in a church setting and who've changed. It can be a blessing to people who have basically have, their views are pretty much the exact same as they were, and to people who have left the church entirely. I think we can do all three. That's what I still hope, is to tell those stories and help all of us get just a better view of somebody else's story and perspective. And I think that's what I was excited to do originally, and I'm still excited to do. So my goal for this hasn't changed a whole lot out of just, I got to keep up. That's the big thing. So,
well, let's get a few music episodes down so we can, you can cross with your own podcast, your other podcast. And, just you can post on there too, to wrap up some time. But I do appreciate your time doing all the editing and the work you do to kind of put this forward. So, round of applause to you. That being said, if you're listening and you're like, I want to cross the line to no, if you want to come on the podcast. Sorry. It's like a decision time, like people, people can think about it for a long time, and we've encouraged them to do it. No, if you want to come on and and discuss wherever you're at, honestly, let's talk. It'd be, yep. If we knew you, it'd be great to catch up with you.
Yep. And I think we got questions. You can literally pick the questions. We got a list of them, and if somebody else is like, oh yeah, I just want to answer these three. Sure, let's do it. I think that's the other thing, is you don't have to go anywhere you don't want to go.
Correct. No, we're not. We have no ratings to fulfill. We have no sponsors to report to.
Right. I think the other thing I just thought of is, I think it'd be fun to hear. We've discussed this a little, so this is maybe a little spoiler. I'm excited to hear us answer some of these questions, because I think that would be fun too. I'm actually interested to hear some of the things you would respond to some of these questions that you thought up of. So that's the other thing that I know we're talking about doing little mini episodes like that. I think that'd be fun as well to hear.
You think people really want to hear that?
Yeah, I do. I think people really do want to hear where you're at. Not me. They don't care about that. But for you, yeah. People like you, less so with me.
That is true.
Yeah.
You've said this for a long time.
Yeah, that's been pretty true for a long time. So, I think we should do that.
Well, I'll drive this bus for as long as we need to. So
that's why I just turn my camera off during some interviews.
It's very distracting when it's on. Yeah. Keep it off, please. No, look, I appreciate all your hard work, and I appreciate everyone out there listening. Honestly, you have plenty of podcasts to choose from. Your time is valuable. And it looks like that some of you who are not our mothers are actually listening on a frequent basis. So thank you so much, because that means a lot.
Yeah, we crossed more than 2 listeners, so whew.
You know what? I can retire. I'm on the 18th hole of my career, too.
I wish
as a
I was.
podcaster. All right. Thanks, Caleb.
All right.
Talk
See you
soon.
later. Thanks for listening to this episode of I Survived Youth Group in the 90s. We hope you enjoyed it. Let us know what you thought about this show or any of our other shows. If you want to follow us on Twitter, you can find us at @SurvivedYG. You can also email the show at ISurvivedYouthGroup@gmail.com. If you're interested in being on the show, you can connect with us on either of those places, the email or the Twitter handle. And we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear about your experience, whether it was you were a 90s youth group kid or a 2000s youth group kid. We just would love to hear about your experience and your story. Again, you didn't necessarily have to attend the youth group we did. We're starting to branch out and hear from other people. Please subscribe and share the podcast. If you're so inclined, leave a rating or review. If you enjoy this show, you might also enjoy the other podcast I do. It's a music podcast called the Album Anniversary Podcast. Over the last couple of years, I've researched and documented the release date of thousands of albums. Throughout the week, I post about them on social media. I've had a couple different formats on the show, but it's just a chance to sit down and talk about the music I've documented, a chance to celebrate special albums to me and other people I have on the show. Once again, that is the Album Anniversary Podcast. The music at the beginning and the end of this show is the instrumental version of the song Positive Charge by the Dread Pirate Roberts. Thanks again, and we'll see you soon.
Okay. Let me start over again. It's going on the outro.